Hi, I'm Sue Stockdale, Association for Coaching's podcast host, and today I'm speaking to Dr. Paul Lawrence, AC Regional Chair, New South Wales, Australia, and also Principal, Centre for Coaching in Organisations, whose presentation at the conference will be on a systemic approach to building coaching cultures. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you.
So why do organisations need to build coaching cultures?
I think that's for organisations to decide for themselves. The organisations who are interested in building coaching cultures, I think it's about wanting to see more people in the organisation relating to other people in the organisation somewhat differently, at least in some contexts. Coaching, at its essence, is around my capacity to really listen and to understand the other person. And it's around my capacity to say what needs to be said in a respectful way that other people appreciate. That to me is the essence of coaching. And I think organisations start off by thinking, we're supposed to be developing our people. People development's really important. And so that capacity to really listen and give good feedback is seen really a key issue in people development. I think the more sophisticated organisations recognise that exactly those same skills are actually very core fundamental skills for influencing more generally.
Now, one of the things that distinguishes your session from some of the other speakers in this track is around the element of it being a systemic approach.
Yes.
What's important about that for you?
Well, there's a couple of answers to that. One is, by talking about systemic, what we're doing here is helping people become aware of the model of change that they operate to in their head, because we've all got one. The prevalent model in organizations is what I would call a first order systemic perspective. What basically means we tend to take quite a top-down approach to things. We assume that leaders control or have control. And so what do I need to do to get a coaching culture? Well, of course, it's obvious why we all should be coaching people. It's, blah, blah, blah. It's really obvious. So we'll just go and teach people this stuff, and of course they'll go and do it. And that's a first order approach to change, which, as I said, is kind of the dominant model within organizations, and it tends not to work.
So what way should they approach things if that model doesn't work?
Well, what we'll be doing in the session is talking about 5 different change models and what the world looks like through each of those 5 lenses. And so essentially it's presenting 5 different ways of going about trying to implement a coaching culture. What I'm not going to be doing in the podcast is telling you how to do it. What I'm going to be doing is sharing with you 5 different approaches, and I'll be encouraging people who come to the session to really have a think about that and decide for themselves what kind of model of change they want to use. The point being here, this word systemic, we tend to use this word systemic in a very, very broad, vague sense. So all systemic means is I'm just looking at the world, I'm just taking a step back. That's all it really means. I'm just taking a step back and I'm looking at things more broadly. What does systemic mean to you? What does that mean? You're looking at the world more broadly, but what are you looking for? And it's that aspect of systemic that just isn't showing up in the coaching narrative at the moment. If we start looking at, and I'm going to present, I'm simplifying things, but I'm saying here's 5 different ways of looking at that broader system. Have a think about which ones appeal to you and around which model of change you want to be building your coaching culture strategy.
So what is it about this systemic perspective that interests you, Paul?
I think there's lots of things, actually. But one is, as I said, that it's not systemic, but that very top-down way of looking at things is the dominant model in organizations today. And I know that from talking to organizations and talking to people who design leadership programs. Without realizing it, they are built in this rather kind of top-down approach. So that interests me because I'm not interested, I'm a coach, right? So I'm not interested about going around organizations telling them how to do it because my view is just my view. What I'm interested in doing is helping organizations see that there are multiple ways of doing this stuff and creating a language so that people can have conversations around these different ways of doing stuff, because that word systemic is being used in this very vague way.
So I get the sense from what you're saying there that you're looking at it from a broader perspective yourself, this question, and you're aiming to help individuals within organizations to gain that greater awareness that then gives them choice as to how to implement a coaching culture.
And the work they do is more likely to be successful. A lot of the programs that are out there, I do a lot of work in the coaching skills space, coaching culture space. A lot of this work, especially in the coaching skills space, is wasted. It doesn't actually result in a change in culture. And one of the things we'll be talking about in the podcast is how do you know whether you're successful or not? Because a lot of people don't really take the time to stop and actually understand the broader impact of the work that they've done. If you're doing coaching skills work and you put a load of people through a course and you say, did you enjoy it? Which is what we tend to do. And they go, yeah, great, job done. Well, is it? If you're doing coaching skills work in the context of trying to build a coaching culture, you have no idea whether you succeeded or not unless you go and talk to the people, unless you go and talk to the other people with whom these people relate. And a lot of organizations don't do that. So there's a whole piece around being successful. And how do you know you're being successful or otherwise?
So to just build on that point you're making there, Paul, organizations almost have to make a broader investment if they're going to be able to measure the value that they've gained from even an external, one-to-one external coaching interaction, it seems to me. So there's not just the immediate experience, which is often paid for X pounds, X dollars per hour for a coach to come in and work with an executive. There's actually a broader sense of measure that needs to be required and perhaps requires investment to get the sense of that impact. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, if you want to understand what the impact of your coaching skills work has had on the broader organization, then you're going to have to invest some more time. Now, the sort of methodologies I'm talking about are qualitative, they're not quantitative. We're not talking about investing huge dollars here. And it's work that you can do internally. But yes, it does require extra effort and extra resource. It doesn't mean breaking the bank.
So what, from your experience of working with organizations, what do organizations gain when they've made that investment and got the better sense of the measurement of the impact? How does that help them?
Okay, so let's take scenario one, where I just whiz a load of people through coaching skills stuff. Are they happy? Are they not? They're happy, therefore job done. You have no sense of whether that person's behavior has really changed in the eyes of the people with whom they interact. And very often their behavior doesn't change. So you haven't actually achieved anything terribly much. Scenario two, let's say I'm doing a reasonably big piece of work and I go and talk to, say, 30 or 40 people across the organization, not just the people who went on the program, but the people with whom those people interact. Now, what you typically do is you do that repeatedly, let's say every 3 months. You do a baseline, and the baseline gives you an idea of where you are now. 3 months into the programs, you're starting to get a sense from people as to what's working and what is not working. And then you can fix that as you go. So this is a very different approach to evaluation. It's not, hey, we've just done it. Did it work? Do we give ourselves a tick or a cross? You're evaluating as you're doing the program, so you can change the program as you go. I'll give you an absolutely concrete example where we did this with an organization and they found the people were loving the program and they, from their perspective, they were behaving differently and there was big change happening in the organization. When we spoke to some of their direct reports, they said, well, they're certainly behaving differently, but I'm really not quite sure why. Because this used to be really cool, right? Because I go and talk to my line manager and they tell me what I needed to do. Now I go in there and he just keeps asking me all these questions. I mean, so yeah, they're coaching, but I don't know what it is. I don't even know what coaching is. So that was showing up as a real kind of fault line, if you like, between the people on the program and their direct reports. So what we did was we invested a little bit of money at that level and having like half-day programs on peer coaching. It was peer coaching. But the real intention, the really important objective was to actually start spreading this language of coaching. And as soon as we did that, then you saw the evaluation started to show, yes, now this is starting to have a real impact. So the ongoing evaluation allows you to make sure that the work you're doing is successful. It's not about doing an end of thing, did I succeed or did I not? It's actually about doing it as you go so you make sure you are successful.
So that sounds a little bit like an Agile approach, if we take that philosophy from other worlds.
I think there's a lot in common with the Agile approach. Depends what you mean by Agile approach. I mean, I don't do a lot of Agile coaching myself, but when I talk to people who are in that space, what they certainly talk about is a very adaptive approach to the work they're doing. And in that sense, it's absolutely parallel. when I talk to some folks in the Agile space, what I don't always get a sense of is that sense of deep reflection and making that time to actually reflect on what's going on here. Maybe some people do, but the folks I do don't so much. This is also a reflective process. You need to make the time to give yourself that space to really ask yourself in a deeply curious way what's actually going on here.
Yeah, so I guess I'm hearing the plan, do, review in action regularly over a period of time, as opposed to putting in place a program that lasts for 12 months and you only review it at the end. Is what I'm hearing you saying, is that a program that might last for 12 months might be reviewed every 4 weeks to get a sense of impact.
It could, yeah. But it's also about the nature of the plan, do, review. A lot of organizations will put, especially, if I'm working in a leadership development function, whether it's the intention or not, the plan, do, review piece can become a little bit of advertising how successful our leadership program is. And of course, we want to communicate the program into the broader organization. This process is a genuinely curious process where I really, really, really want to know what's going on.
So we have to be prepared to look at the flaws as well as the successes.
Well, you've got to stop about even thinking about flaws and successes. It's we're trying to achieve something, and what we're trying to achieve will tend to evolve anyway, because we live in an ever-changing world. Because that's the other thing. When you do a program, you're not either successful or unsuccessful. But we do talk in those very binary terms. If you do something, something happens, and you know what it is, and you know what else you might want to happen.
That makes great sense. Now, if I'm an individual coach listening to your session at the conference, Paul, so I'm not an internal coach in an organization. I'm an independent working within organizations. So I'm asked in to coach clients in organizations. Have I got a way that I can influence the system or get a broader perspective myself? Because very often a coach is going in with an individual sense of working with an executive, and they don't have a broader sense of how they're making an impact.
No, I agree. The answer is definitely yes, because I've heard this quite a lot said recently over the last couple of years, that some coaches who are sort of starting to get into this, inverted commas, systemic way of thinking, they say things like, I don't really want to coach individuals anymore because I'm just not having, I'm coaching individuals isn't going to make a significant difference. I want to go and coach teams. My response to that is to say, it doesn't matter whether you're coaching individuals or coaching teams. The issue here is, how are you thinking? Because if you're thinking in this kind of, if you've got access to different ways of thinking, different systemic ways of thinking, then your work's going to be impactful anyway. And by the way, looked at through some of these systemic lenses, you as an individual coach are having an impact, a broader impact. This notion of I'm a coach and I'm just sort of a visitor here, I'm a neutral observer, is nonsense. As soon as I start interacting with people inside that organization, I am having an impact as to what happens in that organization, just the same as anybody else in that organization. So to have that awareness and that lens through which we're understanding the impact we're having is useful for any coach.
I think that the other question that springs to my mind, Paul, is the difference between, or is there a difference between a coaching culture, which is what we've been talking about so far, and a learning culture? Those phrases often get used. Are they one and the same, or are they different?
It depends how you define them. I mean, that's the thing. We invent all these lovely phrases, and then we want to make sure that they're all different from each other. I mean, it totally depends what you mean by a coaching culture, and it depends what you mean by a learning culture. And one of the first things that we do if we're working with an organization to help them build a coaching culture is help them understand for themselves what they actually mean. Because that word coaching means lots of different things. Some people want a coaching culture because we need all our people developing other people so that we've got this flow of talent going through the organization. Other people say we want a coaching culture because we're all working in silos and we need to start cooperating with each other. Initiative is very different in different organizations. And the same, I'm sure, could be said of a learning culture. But I certainly don't think you need the word coaching. I actually think what we're talking about here is actually something quite fundamental in terms of how people relate to each other. And in some organizations, that word coaching may even get in the way. And let's not even call it coaching culture. Let's call it something different. Whatever works for the organization.
Well, I think what you've given us a sense of in this conversation is that bigger question about relating to one another, the importance of language, how it can help and hinder, and that there are different ways, different systemic approaches to look at a situation from. I'm sure it's given people a real idea of the value they'll gain from listening into your session. If people want to find out more about you, Paul, once they've heard what you've got to say in your session, how might they do that on the internet or social media?
They can go and have a look at my LinkedIn page, or they can just send me an email.
Fantastic. It's been really great to speak to you today. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, Sue.